The sun was low over Hamilton Township when 7-year-old Megan Kanka stepped out of her family's tan house on Barbara Lee Drive. The neighborhood was the kind of place where parents watched from porches and kids pedaled bikes along the sidewalk without thinking about danger. On this warm July evening in 1994, Megan was doing something she had done countless times before. She walked across the yard with a plastic toy and headed toward the house directly across the street, where she believed a neighbor kept a friendly dog. She loved animals, and she had been told there was a puppy there she could pet. No one watching her that night could have known she was walking into a trap. The man who answered the door was not a stranger to the area. His name was Jesse Timendequas, a quiet, heavy-set 33-year-old who kept to himself. He lived in the house with 2 other men, both previously convicted sex offenders. All 3 had moved into the neighborhood without any requirement to notify the families living around them. None of the parents on the block knew they were there. Megan didn't know either when she stepped onto the front step and asked about the dog. Inside the house, the situation changed instantly. Once Megan crossed the threshold, Timendequas closed the door and confronted her. Investigators later learned that he lured her into his bedroom under the pretense of showing her the puppy. There was no dog. What happened next took place in a matter of minutes. Timendequas assaulted her, then strangled her with a belt to silence her. There was no prolonged struggle. She was a child confronted by an adult determined to control her. Her cause of death, the medical examiner later confirmed, was asphyxiation. While the attack happened inside the house, Megan's parents began noticing the quiet. She had only been outside for a few minutes, but when she didn't return, the sense that something was wrong grew fast. Her mother checked the yard, then called neighbor after neighbor. Within a short time, police officers were knocking on doors and starting a search across the block. Residents gathered on the street, scanning yards and calling Megan's name. The neighborhood that always felt safe suddenly felt small and suffocating. In the middle of the chaos, Timendequas watched from his porch as officers questioned people up and down the block. He made no move to help. He waited until evening, then loaded Megan's body into his truck and drove several miles to a nearby park along the Delaware River. There, under cover of darkness, he left her near the water in a shallow, concealed area. When he returned home, he acted as though nothing had happened. Detectives began closing in quickly. The 3 men living in the house across from Megan's home were known to police, not for their current address, but for their criminal histories. Interviews revealed inconsistencies, especially from Timendequas. His story shifted with each question. Officers noticed his discomfort when asked directly about Megan. They detected tension in his voice, the kind that shows up when a person senses the space around them narrowing. After hours of pressure, he broke. He admitted to luring Megan inside, assaulting her, and killing her. He told detectives where to find her body. When officers located Megan's remains near the riverbank, their worst fears were confirmed. The search ended not with rescue, but recovery. The news reached the neighborhood within minutes. Parents cried openly on their lawns. Investigators who had children of their own struggled with the reality of what they had just seen. The crime had been fast, brutal, and committed by a man living directly across the street. It was the kind of threat no parent can prepare for because it violates the most basic expectation, that a child walking a few yards from home will still be safe. The shock didn't stay local. As details became public, the case spread across national news. Reporters learned that Timendequas had been convicted previously for sexual offenses against young girls. He had completed his sentences and lived in halfway houses, yet at no point were the Kankas or any neighbors informed that 3 sex offenders were living steps away from a school bus stop. The anger was immediate and widespread. People wanted to know why there had been no warning, why a repeat offender could blend into a neighborhood without any kind of notification system. Megan's parents, Richard and Maureen Kanka, refused to let the case become just another headline. They began pushing for laws requiring sex offenders to register with law enforcement and for communities to be notified when high-risk offenders moved into their area. New Jersey lawmakers responded quickly. Within months, the state passed a set of statutes that became known collectively as Megan's Law. They required registration, monitoring, and community notification in cases involving offenders deemed a threat to children or public safety. The momentum spread nationally. In 1996, President Bill Clinton signed federal legislation mandating that all states establish sex offender registries and create systems allowing communities to access information about offenders living nearby. It was one of the most sweeping changes in criminal justice policy in modern American history. Many officials credited the Kanka family for driving the effort, saying their advocacy prevented future attacks by revealing risks that once stayed hidden. Back in New Jersey, prosecutors prepared their case against Timon DeQuas. The evidence was overwhelming. His confession was detailed. Physical evidence from the house supported the timeline he provided. The community's grief hardened into determination, and the courtroom filled with people who had watched the search unfold that night. In 1997, a jury convicted him of murder and sexual assault. He was sentenced to death, though years later, New Jersey abolished the death penalty and commuted his sentence to life without parole. The impact of Megan Kanka's murder reached far beyond the courtroom. The children on Barbara Lee Drive no longer played outside unsupervised. Families moved away from the block where the crime occurred. The house where the offenders had lived was eventually demolished. Megan's parents stayed active in public safety causes for years, working to ensure no one else would be blindsided the way they were. For law enforcement, the case became a touchstone for understanding how hidden histories can endanger entire communities. For legislators, it became proof that public outrage could transform into permanent policy. And for parents, it remained one of the clearest reminders that the most dangerous predators are not always strangers lurking in distant places. Sometimes they live within sight of a child's front door. Megan Kanka's life was short, but the law named after her reshaped how the nation responds to sexual violence and repeat offenders. The changes did not undo what happened on that July night, but they forced a system that once protected offenders' anonymity to recognize the safety of children first. Thank you for listening to Homicide Files. Subscribe for more true crime stories.